backpack.
Living in a memory.
Hey guys, thank you for coming back. As always, when we have questions, we call our guy Pete Garcia. And for all of his fans out there, I promise I will try not to talk over Pete today. So, but you know, Pete, I haven't decided if I'm going to call your fans Garciaites or Petesteens. So I'm still trying to figure out which one. So, but anyway, we are glad to have Pete Garcia in today, and we are going to talk about normalcy bias, what it is, why it is affecting our culture today, and if you continue down this road, what you can expect out of your life. So, Pete, I'm going to start it off this way. And I was really looking at this because I've been talking to people about things that are going on, Bible prophecy, been talking to people, witnessing to them, because I truly believe we're getting quickly into the very end. I think we're in the last minutes of the last days myself. And now, how long before Jesus comes back, I do not know, nor am I going to set a date. But I think we're getting unbelievably close, which leads me to a lot of things. Number one, how I live my life. Number two, am I being faithful to what Jesus wants me to do? And that's to tell people about him. And then how I conduct myself as a man, not just when people are looking, but when people are not looking, because I know God is. And that doesn't just come now. In 2019, when I got my life right with the Lord, these things really started to come into play in my life again. But people like you and Tom Hughes, Brandon Holdhouse, Billy Crone, you know, I don't want to say the normal criminals there, but, you know, the normal prophecy guys, you know, it really started to bring about a new aspect into my life. And that is, you know what, Jesus is coming back. I went to Bible college and seminary, never talked about it. And, you know, people think, you know, we were just talking a second ago, people think, you know, you're a big guy, you're ex-bodybuilder, pro bodybuilder, blah, blah, blah. You're a meathead. And I'm like, no, actually, I have two different degrees. I'm not quite a meathead as you think. And believe it or not, I used to literally speak to thousands of people at a time. I'm not very good at it anymore, but at one time I did. But we're at a point now where I'm almost alarmed at what I'm seeing. And let me equate this, because a lot of the guys that are going to watch this are bodybuilders. And so let me equate this to what is called homeostasis. Okay, homeostasis is where the body is always trying to seek its level. No matter what's going on the outside, it will always internally try to seek its level. Good example, guys, when you are dieting, girls, when you are dieting and you start to cut calories, guess what happens? Your body is trying to continue to be level. It's trying to continue in a comfortable state. And so what it will do is, when you deprive it so much, it will seek its level and it will start to burn muscle instead of fat. In other words, it's trying to, quote unquote, deny what's going on the outside so that the inside stays healthy, level, all of that. It always seeks homeostasis. It always seeks a leveling. That to me is normalcy bias, in a way, because from what I understand, Pete, normalcy bias is no matter what's going on around you on the external, the internal, you're always trying to keep a level. You're trying to deny, you know, it's almost a denial of what's going on the outside in order to protect your fragility on the inside, or your just ignorance, or your just denial of what's going on the outside. And I see this in the church. I talk to Christians. Christians seem to be so uninformed. It's almost it's almost amazing. I mean, you sit there and you go, they can't be that ignorant or they can't be that uninformed, and yet people are. And so again, when I wanted to talk about this, I felt there was no better person to talk to about normalcy bias than Pete, because I've heard you actually talk about it before, but it's becoming a very real problem in small town USA. And I love what you were just talking about, and I'd love for you to repeat that about COVID that you dealt with and what you saw, because we dealt with it the same way here. So, what say you about normalcy bias and what we're experiencing now?
Let me just start off with the definition. And so normalcy bias is a psychological phenomenon in which people have a tendency to underestimate the likelihood or impact of a disaster or other crisis.
Yeah.
And this bias can lead people to make inadequate and inappropriate preparations or for a crisis, or to underestimate the severity of the situation.
Yeah.
And you see
So they're
this
denying.
every season, every hurricane season. You'll see people ride out to say, "No, I'm not going to evacuate. There's a Cat 5 coming, but I stayed during the last hurricane, nothing happened, so I'm going to stay during this hurricane and watch my stuff so it doesn't get looted or whatever."
Yeah.
And then you never hear from those people again. So it is the mind's ability to underestimate some crisis or event that has the potential to cause death or severe damage, whatever. And there's a quote I love. There's a book I love. It's not a Christian book. It's called World War Z, and it's by Max Brooks. It's Mel Brooks, the famous director and movie star guy. His son wrote a book called World War Z for World War Zombie, and so it's like a kind of a recapitulation of the 10 years of the zombie wars. Now, it's a fiction book, obviously, but the thing I love about it, and it's not about so much about zombies,
Yeah.
is it is about people's reaction to crisis when things happen, when bad things happen. How do people react? And I think he nails it throughout most of the book. But there's a quote in there, and it's a short one. It says, "Most people don't believe something can happen until it already has. And that's not stupidity or weakness, that's just human nature."
Mm.
And so for the last 2000 years or so, we live in this day and age where the normal, natural order of the world is just that, normal, natural. When supernatural things happen or catastrophic things happen, they are abnormal. There are things that happen on rare occasions. They're not the normal day-to-day cycle that we go through. So, and I was telling you earlier that this town I live in is a small town, and I've been coming here since 2007. And for most of the time I'd been here, I felt like this town was really insulated from the events of the world because there wasn't a lot of military. We're just far enough outside of the metroplex to where we're not really having to deal with that drama. And it's a fairly conservative area, so people generally tend to think along the same lines for the most part. And it wasn't until COVID happened that really kind of woke people up to the fact that even things out there can touch us here.
Yeah.
And toilet paper shortages and all the other the little scares of fuel flare-ups, fuel price flare-ups and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like now there's really not anywhere people can go that aren't going to be touched by the events that are going on in the world one way or another.
Yeah.
So um but yeah, that's kind of where normalcy bias finds itself in. And it's this idea that because something hasn't happened yet, it's not going to happen. And so you tend to think of tomorrow as being the same as today, as the same as yesterday. And it's a dangerous idea because you think about September 11th 2001, 9/11.
Yeah.
Well, that was a just a catastrophic day that really changed life for everybody, not just in America, even all over the world. And it changed how we travel, how we get on planes now. It changed a lot of the government powers and authorities they have to surveil us and imprison us and do other, all sorts of things. And it also ramped up this surveillance mentality around the world. Um, and so that changed everything, right? But think about September the 10th, the day just prior. So
Mm-hmm.
September 11th, 2001 was a Tuesday. that Monday, there were people going to school, there were people going to work, there were people making plans for that coming weekend, there were people that were living their life and just going about their daily basis. There's probably people that said, hey, I'm retiring tomorrow on Tuesday is my last day of work and blah blah blah. And they're just thinking that tomorrow is going to be exactly like today was, with which was like yesterday. And we just kind of go through life with this mentality, not understanding that tomorrow is not guaranteed. And it doesn't have to be a national disaster
Yeah.
or crisis event. It could be a personal one. You could be driving to work the next day and get in a car accident, and then you're paralyzed from the neck down, or you die, or close relative or friend dies. Something can upend your world very quickly. And
Right.
so we in scripture, God tells us that our life is like a vapor. It is just like here today, gone tomorrow. It is not um, our mortal beings, our mortal lives, our body, our flesh is something that is very temporary. But he also says in scripture in Ecclesiastes 3 that God put eternity into the heart of man so that man would desire the things beyond himself, and those things can only be found and satisfied by God. So most people suppress that inner nature, that spiritual nature, and just chase after the flesh, and they fulfill that through materialism, through business, pleasure, whatever. And they go through life that way, and then something happens, and boom, they're out. They're out of the game. They're in eternity. Now they're having to deal with the consequences of being eternally separated from God, from their Creator. And as for Christians, when Christians go through, you and I talked about this earlier, is when Christians go through this life where they really don't think about what the Bible says about tomorrow. They just kind of go through the motions. They're just kind of concerned about their own little bubble here and now. That is it takes the fire out of you. It takes the
Right.
impetus out of you to share the gospel and to be busy about the Lord's work, because it takes away the urgency, because it diminishes through this idea of normalcy bias. It diminishes the possibility that we may not have tomorrow. Today may be our last day. So I think that's the importance of understanding it, combating it, and not allowing it to take nest in our hearts and our minds. To be in order to do that is to be cognizant that this thing exists, and it's going to cause my reaction to things. And as long as you're aware of it and you're able to kind of reconcile with it and able to evaluate a situation and make better choices, I think that's the first step in the process.
So when it comes to the people in the West in Western culture, I was it you I was telling the story I heard of a woman who got she came to know Christ in the Middle East, and when
Mm,
she did,
yeah.
she was brutally beaten, almost murdered for her faith, and by some miracles she was able to come to the United States, her and her husband, and she was here just a very few months and proclaimed to her husband, I feel like we need to go back to the Middle East. And he's like, wait a minute, what are you doing? No, 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 no. We can't do that. And she goes, and she told him that she felt like her faith was becoming dull and she was living in a cloud over here, of just spiritual dearth. And how do we as Americans, and I'm going to break it down because we live in America, and that's always been considered, for the past couple hundred years, the American dream. You come over here, you work hard, you make a living, and we live differently than anyone else standard wise, pretty much in the world. How do we stay out of a normalcy bias when our normal is so much different than the rest of the world?
Yeah. And even American, when we talk about American exceptionalism,
Yeah.
in one regard, it's that America is unique in its governance, the way we govern ourselves through our Constitution. I mean, we're not a democracy; we're a constitutional republic. In our history, and not just our history, but our location. I mean, we're surrounded by weak neighbors to the north and south, and we have these giant oceans on our left and right that protect us, to a
Right.
degree from our enemies. And now that was a great advantage starting out, in the 1800s.
Yeah.
Not so much today with the advent of cruise missiles and things like that, but um, we are exceptional in those regards. But I think we're also exceptional in regards to um, the freedom that we've been afforded. This is not the norm for
Right.
human history. I mean, we are the exception to the norm for human history. Most of human history was governed by kings, queens, generals, chiefs, tyrants, dictators, despots, um, and there are very few times emperors, Caesars.
Mm-hmm.
Very few times have there been free people that can pursue their own endeavors and their own pleasures and things like that. I mean, if you've got a guy going to the gym this morning working out, um, and he has the freedom to do that because he's got time off from work or his school doesn't start yet or whatever the case is. I mean, you got to think in most parts of the world, a gym is a luxury. Like I was
Right.
watching TikTok the other day, and these dudes are working out with like a stick, and they have like blocks of cement on on either side of
Yeah.
it, and they're trying to,
I did that.
and well, and even then, I mean, most people are working so much in other parts of
Yeah.
the world, especially in the on the non-industrialized parts of the world, whether it's in agriculture or whatever. They don't need to work out. I mean, they're working all day long, burning calories, and they can't put on weight because they're burning more
Right.
calories than they take in. And so we do this for our own benefit, for our own, personal reasons, whatever the case may be. But that's something that we have the luxury to do, and this luxury that we have with free time is afforded to us through things like increased technology. We don't have to go out and grow our own food for the most part.
Right.
We don't have to hunt our own food. We can just go to a grocery store or a restaurant and buy food that's already prepared for us, and we take it home and eat. And that just that one thing of buying food, or growing food, hunting food, preparing food, just that one thing of eating and sustaining yourself takes up most people's days in other parts of the world. If you ever watch that show Alone, where they go out
Yep.
and they drop these people off in Alaska or
Oh
whatever
yeah.
on these little islands, and they've got to just survive off whatever they can find. And they've got like 10 tools that they can take with them. So most people will take a line with a fishing hook, and they'll take a machete and some other things, but they take this stuff and they spend most of their day scavenging for food. Even if they find fish and they end up losing so much weight in the process that really the only way to win that show, because it's the last person that to make it to the end,
Right.
wins all of it, right? You have to go into that show probably a good 50 pounds overweight, because by the time that you get to day 60 or day 70 and you've just been consisting off of mollusk and whatever fish you can find and vegetables and roots and whatever, I mean, you've dropped, I mean, you're down to like 15% body fat.
Right.
And if you get below 15%, they cut you from the show. But my point is that they spend all of their time scouring for food and scavenging for food. We don't have to worry about that. We have this luxury in the United States of America and in the West, I would say, in large part, that affords us to go chase our own pursuits for whatever it is. But what's that old saying? Idle hands is the devil's plaything or whatever.
Right.
And so in this luxury that we've been afforded, it's produced a very um, self-seeking culture and self-centered culture, not just America, but in the West.
Right.
And it's allowed for all of these very toxic ideas to be put forth that diminishes the threat. People are not living in reality anymore when we're dealing with what's the most important thing of the day is your pronouns. We're not living in reality anymore when you're more concerned about your hair color and what sticker you have on your car versus being shelled or being rocketed by some
Yeah,
enemy force
exactly.
out there.
Mm.
We've lived in this lap of luxury for so long that most people don't live in reality anymore, and that's it contributes intensely to this idea of normalcy bias, that this veil only gets removed from our eyes in brief periods of time when something really catastrophic happens, and I would even say in Israel today, or on the 7th of October when Hamas attacked them, most of those people in those kibbutzes and communities, from my understanding, were politically in the left side. Like
Right.
they were left. I don't know what that is in Israel, like what that party is, but they were kind of liberal leaning. And this tragedy was so horrific that it united all parties there. It united all groups, all different walks of life from the Jewish perspectives in a way that nothing else really could. And
Yeah.
I think that's both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a terrible thing that it happened, but what came out of it is something that is national unity. It happened after 9/11 with us. It happened after the Holocaust. It happens after these major events disrupt this illusion that we live under, that the world is just going to be like today is going to be like tomorrow is like yesterday, and so on and so forth. So it wakes us up and it brings us out of the matrix, so to speak. So
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me is I saw a thing the other day, a study the other day that said 68% of American adults are overweight. Now, I'm not trying to make this into a fitness thing, but what I am saying is we don't live in reality. I am up until 2019 for 15 years, the epitome of normalcy bias. No matter what happened around me, I was trying to deny everything and live in my own little bubble, my own little world of bodybuilding as I was running from God. And so I think that what we do is we get into this mode of life where we become not just in a rut, so to speak, but we live in such a way where we set up mechanisms in our life that keep us in a normalcy bias. In other words, there are things, the tyranny of the urgent, things that constantly take up our time. And so we're comfortable in those things. And when those things are removed, now all of a sudden we're faced with ourselves. I don't know if any, and I'm sure there are some people that will watch this, that are Christians, and if you've ever done any fasting, and I do, and I actually love to fast, but when you fast, you strip away all of the you strip away the mechanisms of busyness, you strip away all of the food, all of the things that keep you in that normalcy bias even on a daily basis. And now all of a sudden you strip all that away and you're left with your own thoughts, you're left with God, and you don't know what to do a lot of times, because now all of a sudden you're sitting there going, okay, now where am I at? Because everything's been stripped away. And I honestly think that God is saying to us, guys, I'm yes, we're in the last days, and God is stripping away and will keep stripping away a lot of these mechanisms that we have in place through world events. I mean, look what's going on in Israel. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was like, you do realize that one shot from a missile going awry, and we could be in a war. My son could get drafted. Your son could get drafted. I mean, we're not far off from a lot of crazy, catastrophic things. Now, one thing different about us as Christians is we trust God, that I know that no matter whatever happens, God is still in control and I can trust him with it. And I was talking to a friend of mine named Kevin, and he was talking and kind of lamenting the fact that business is not going as normal and things of that nature. And I told him, I said, Kev, I want you to let's talk about Job for a second. And when we don't understand God, there's a man who, you want to talk about normalcy bias was stripped away. There's the guy, he's going along, he's living his life, he's got his family, he's making wealth, he's doing all of those things. And then he catches, God's attention and Satan's attention. And God says, hey, what do you think of Job? Let me, you have a hedge around him. Let me have him. And well, he'll curse you and die. He'll curse you or he'll turn on you. And God said, hey, go ahead, but you can't kill him. You can't touch him. So Satan comes in and takes everything he has, his kids, his wealth, and all that stuff. And then, we know that Satan goes and presents himself before God again. And God's like, well, Job, see, told you. And Satan's like, yeah, well, guess what? Skin for skin, buddy. Give him to me and he'll curse you. And God says, okay, but you can't take his life. And next thing you know is you see Job sitting in a pile of ashes, scraping sores off of him from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And I love the fact that because you start to look at what's going on, and it seems like God is starting to strip away, even in the Western culture. You talked to, it's such a great point, Pete, that you made about COVID. People think they're untouchable, and then all of a sudden you see the effects of that in your little town, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, it does hit the whole world. I was talking to somebody about, the globalists are talking about 15-minute cities and all this, and they're like, that stuff that's happening all over the world. I was like, have you ever been downtown and seen a couple of these other places that I mentioned? I was like, those are basically 15-minute cities. And they're like, what? And they're completely shocked. And I told them, I said, everything is closing in. Everything is closing in, and things are going to be stripped away. What did you think the last days were going to look like? Well, I love Job because, if Job finally gets to a point where he's like, you know what, I wish I'd never been born. God, wish I would have been born, stillborn. I could have just been buried and done with it and been with you. And I love that whole set of reasoning, that whole set of questioning that God gives Job. And this is what I was telling my friend yesterday. I said, you know what? I said, I almost feel like God is saying, stand in front of me. And because, I got news for you. When I stand before God, I'm sure I'm going straight on my face. I have no doubt I'm going straight on my face. There's no way I can stand before the Lord Jesus. I have so much to answer for in my life. I'm so grateful that I'm forgiven and all of that stuff. But I know I'm going straight on my face. And, and I love how God tells Job, stand up and be a man. Stand up, buddy, and you answer me. And God goes through all these rhetorical questions about, where were you when I hung the stars? Where were you, when I did this? Can you stop the sea from coming up on the sand? Can you feed the lions? Can you do all of these other things? And I love the response. Job just hung his head. And what did he say? Man, I got myself into things that I didn't even know what I was doing. And the one thing that strikes me is God never explains to Job why any of it happened. He just never does. And it's all about, you know what, Job, are you going to trust me? And one of the things that I'm seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Pete, is normalcy bias seems to be a moving, living thing. And when I say that, I say this: the frog in the pot. The frog is always trying to levelize itself, just like homeostasis. The water's heating up around it, but its body is continuing to normalize itself so it doesn't understand that it's being heated up until it's too late. I feel like that's what's going on around us. Is normalcy bias a moving thing that they take freedoms away from us, we normalize. They take freedoms away from us, we normalize. Things happen in the world, we normalize to that because we're used to seeing it now. Is that a thing?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. It's called incrementalism, and well, incrementalism in regards to political science, not geography or these other things. But like incrementalism means that it's this slow, subtle changes that happen over time that most people don't realize are taking away their rights and freedoms until so much time has passed. And it's so subtle and so small little changes in verbiage and this and that most people don't realize until it's too late. And if you look at where we are today, with regard to the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, so many things we just put up with when, and the government has no right or even they have no constitutional right or legal right to impose restrictions on free speech, on any
Right.
kind of free speech, um, or prohibitions against carrying firearms or whatever. They don't. It's same with religion, you know. So it's the freedom, it's the freedom from religion or from the freedom of the government telling you what you can believe or not believe, or to act in that way. And that's where we've just come to accept it as normal because the people before us accepted it as normal, even though it's not legally correct or lawfully right. And
Right.
so we just kind of tolerate it, and it's incrementalism. It's exactly what you said. It's the frog in the pot. The water, you don't, when you cook frogs, you don't put them in a boiling hot water because they'll jump right out. You put them in cold or warm water, and you slowly turn the heat up, and before they know it, their muscles have already been cooked, and they can't even move anymore, and then they're dead at that point. So I think we're
Right.
already at that stage of where the water is just starting to boil, and we're looking around like, wait, those are bubbles. Why is it so hot in here? um
Yeah.
Alexander Tytler had that list, and it had a nation, the cycle of nations, and it goes from bondage to faith, from faith to courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to complacency, from complacency to apathy, and then from apathy to dependency, and then dependency to bondage. And it just
Mm.
goes through these cycles. And I think we're at the last stage of that, where we're dependent upon the government for so many things. And we're quickly being put back into a system of bondage. So, this experiment in American exceptionalism is about run its course, which is normal. And I say normal in the sense that most kingdoms, empires, nations really don't go beyond 400 years
Right.
before fundamentally changing. And really, it's more like 200 years where they change. Um, I have a quote from Sir John Glubb, who wrote this amazing book back in the 1800s called, or the early 1900s, called The Fate of Empires. And he says that the people of the great nations of the past seem normally to have imagined that their preeminence would last forever. Rome appeared to its citizens to be destined to be for all time the mistress of the world. The Abbasid caliphs of Baghdad declared that God had appointed them to rule mankind until the day of judgment. 70 years ago, many people in Britain believed that the empire would endure forever. Although Hitler failed to achieve his objectives, he declared that Germany would rule the world for 1,000 years. That sentiments like these could be publicly expressed without evoking derision shows that in all the ages, the regular rise and fall of great nations has passed unperceived. The simplest statistics prove that the steady rotation of one nation after another at regular intervals is the normal.
Mm.
So I think that we you know looking today, and looking around today and talking to people, um you could go out and do this exercise today. I mean, after we're done, I mean, you get to ask anybody, hey man, what are you gonna do for retirement? And say, oh, well, I've got my 401k, and I've got stocks and bonds, or I'm investing in Bitcoin, or whatever. In this, and they're looking down the road for 20, 30 years, thinking that everything is going to be like it is today. Maybe a little different. There might be flying cars and things like that, but they think
Right.
that the way things are today are the way things are going to be 30, 40 years down the road. And
Yeah.
what the Bible tells us is that's not going to happen. I mean, we went through these in the previous videos, but like the Bible puts a timestamp on nations and empires. Acts 17:26, it says that God ordains the times and sets the boundaries of these nations, and
Yeah.
he determines when they're going to come to their own end. And I think that the United States was uniquely created for the last days. It was kind of a surprise nation. Nobody really expected a nation like us to come about. And you don't see us in the pages of Bible prophecy anywhere. So something has to happen that takes us out of the equation. And I think, if America right now, let's say we weren't in debt, let's say that our national debt was like $1 trillion. Let's
Right.
say that we had strong leadership and competent government at every level. We had a strong faith in the system. Very little corruption.
Right.
Businesses were for the most part on the up and up, right? And we were out there doing God's good work. and you would tell them, hey, the United States is not in Bible prophecy, people would laugh at you and say, well, that's thousands of years down the road, or hundreds of years down the road. And I
Mm-hmm.
could say that, we could look back into like the 1950s, and probably that was a little bit what America was like then. People generally
Yeah.
had a good faith in the system and in the government, and you had competent leadership up and down the chain, and really in both parties. And look at where we are today, not even 70 years later. I mean, we are 33 trillion in debt, almost 34 trillion. We've got, I don't know, this guy that should not even be, he should be in a retirement home. He can't even stay awake during meetings with other world leaders. You
Ugh.
have it's corruption from top to bottom. You've got, corporations that are way more powerful than most governments in the world, dictating to the rest of us, and these guys aren't elected, how we're going to live,
Yeah.
in 10 years of the Great Reset or whatever. So you can see very clearly that we're not in Bible prophecy for a reason. Something has happened, and I think most people don't want to think about it because it's uncomfortable. They don't want to think about this world, this life that we have coming to an end
Right.
abruptly, and it is
Especially
unsettling.
here,
Yeah,
especially in the Western culture, wouldn't you say? I mean, wouldn't you
yeah.
think in the Western culture it's going to be more of a shock than it is going to be in a lot of other places in the world?
I mean, you look at Europe, for instance. France, Germany, and other countries,
Right.
Poland. I mean, they've been getting conquered and fighting wars for, pretty
Right.
steadily for the last, 1,000 years. And how
Yeah.
many times has the French government changed hands? They've changed 3 or 4 times, maybe probably about 3 or 4 times since we became a nation. So, for most, I think most other people in the world, this idea that we're going to be around forever, it's not been anything they've really been able to embrace lately because of how turbulent the world has become
Yeah.
over the last 200 years. But the United States, we could trace our roots back to when the Puritans came in 1620. And so we just kind of think that the way things are always going to be. So, in a large measure, for those people that aren't really plugged into what's going on in the world and how fast things are changing, they aren't really concerning themselves with the future not being centuries away, but really being, just years away, if that. So,
And with reality. And having said that, that's a great segue. End Times Headlines. I don't know if you guys have that app on your phone, but I do. They put out they kind of parrot news stories that he finds all over the world. But he has a headline on here that said Russia and China basically are saying they're going to turn the tables on America as the Middle East crisis grows. And
yeah.
I heard Russia just came out and said the United States basically um, is not going to be involved in the New World Order. And so it's, you know, and how many times have we been threatened to get nuked by Russia, China, and North Korea here lately? Now, I'm not saying that is what the end of the United States is. That's not what I'm saying. But we don't live in a world anymore where America cannot be reached.
Yeah.
That our borders cannot be breached by missiles. I don't think that you're going to see a ground invasion by Russia or China into the United States, at least, not until, nukes would fly type of thing. And then I don't think they would need to. But we are reachable now. And I think that when you look at the way we're living, we're still living like back in the 30s and 40s, like we can't be touched. And you talk to people, and I'm talking about people in the church as well. There's this, what, I might be the frog in the pot and things might be getting ready to boil, but I'm in my bubble. And that's why the thumbnail I sent you with the guy in the bubble. And of course, this is a channel that's trying to reach bodybuilders or anybody that's unsaved, but athletes, that type of thing. So I've got a bodybuilder in a bubble and a demonic looking clown popping that bubble. And I really, really think that's I think that's where we are. We're on the verge of that needle hitting that bubble pretty quick. Things are going to change. Things have the potential to change. You know, we could get up tomorrow morning and the world has changed again. And the United
Mhm.
States could be forever changed. And so, you know, and so this thing of normalcy bias, you know, I look at it and or you know whatever you want to call it, you look at it and it's literally just a denial complex. I mean, it's just denying everything is basically all it is. And it
Yeah.
concerns me because I see it in my own kids. You know, I try to, you know, you try to talk to kids, we try to talk to the younger generation, and there's not just a denial, there's a complete lack of knowledge of what's going on. And a lot of that is due to the fact, I believe, that they are watching and getting information from sources that are keeping them that in that normalcy bias.
Yep. Yeah. And there's reaching the younger generation is incredibly difficult for the simple fact that at that age, me
Man.
at that age, back when I was at that age, they don't really care about. I mean, that's
No, they
well,
don't.
in certain regards, it is our fault as parents and as the education system, as the media, etc., because we insulate them. We don't want to show them how terrible the world is when
Right.
they're like 11, 12, because you don't want them to turn into these, fatalists who just like, what's the point of living
Right.
if the world's going to end in 2 years or whatever. But you try, when my kids ask me things about, what's going on in the world, I try and couch it in a way that they can understand it and say, well, look, even though these bad things are happening, we know that Jesus is coming back because he told us, he promised us. And if
Right.
all the other promises he gave us in the Bible is true, and they have been, we can trust him that he'll take care of us and see us through this until he returns for us, which I think will be very soon. And so in other instances, my youngest son, I use Minecraft because he likes to play Minecraft a lot. And I say, I said, the way we live in the world today, and I don't know if you play Minecraft, but you have two different kind of modes you can play in. You have survival mode and you have like creative. Survival, you can die in this mode. You have to go out and get your own materials. You have to collect all your own wood and stone or whatever, and then build your house, and then you go out and just, it's like life. And I said, that's kind of how
Right.
we live today. It's like survival mode. I said, but when Christ returns and we get raptured and all that happens, it's going to be like creative mode. You can't die, you can fly, you can do whatever you want. And I said, that's kind of how I couched it for him to understand. But whoever it is in your life that you're trying to reach and you're trying to, you got to talk to the level that they're
Right.
at, to that you're not overwhelming them with
Right.
bad news.
Yeah.
And you got to give them hope at the end, because we know that even though the last days are incredibly demanding and vexing, and Jesus said it was the worst time, the time that's coming, we're seeing it coming now. He said it was the worst time in all of human history, worse than anything that's ever happened. He said it's going to be the absolute worst time, and that if he didn't come back and personally intervene, that no flesh would be saved, that nobody would
Right.
be alive at the end. So I think we share that with them, but we also have to couch that in the message of hope which Scripture gives us.
Yeah.
And I think that people that today that live in this bubble, if you will, they they are living like, very much like with their head in the sand. They're walking past the graveyard and they're whistling, and they've got their fingers in their ears like la 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 la, like they don't want to
Oh yeah.
deal with the problem, but the problems aren't going to go away. Eventually
Yeah.
they're going to come and reach into your life, and you're going to have to deal with those issues and those situations, just like people here in my town had to deal with the fact that there's a toilet paper shortage, whether it was real or not. The reaction to it caused it to become real, because pretty soon everybody was hoarding toilet paper, as silly as that sounds. But the next
No.
thing may be fuel, the next thing may be electricity, the next thing may be food. I think they said that all the Walmarts in the United States, and I would probably guess most of the grocery stores, the chains, they only have about a 3-day supply worth of food. So let's just say a solar storm hits the US and completely wipes out our electrical grid, fries
Right.
all our satellites, the internet's down, all the electricity systems that aren't hardened are down. Really, there's, take away all the food that's refrigerated, because that's going to go first. That's going to quickly become, not edible. But the canned goods and all those other things, those packaged foods, there's only like 3 days worth of food left in
Yeah.
Walmarts. And if something does happen, dude, you talk about chaos. Like,
Mm.
your friends and neighbors, like, you might be buddy buddy now and you're going to stick together, but when it comes to eating and or starving to death, people are going to turn on each other very quickly. And that's where this survivalist mentality is going to kick in, and you're going to try and protect your own. And like the Donner Party, when they're going to California and they get stuck there, and they run out of food in this blizzard, and they end up eating their belts, their
Yeah.
leather shoes, their dog, their horses. I mean, and eventually they, we know what they did, but
Yeah.
um,
That was
people are going to
cannibalism.
do whatever they have to. Yeah, they're going to do whatever they have to do to survive,
Yeah.
and that's going to come before friendships, coworkers, and all this other stuff. So, I think it behooves us to when we get the opportunity to share with people, to be prepared. And I'm not a prepper by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that it's prudent to have some preparations made, food, water, and things like that, because you never know when some disaster is going to happen. We called it snowmageddon back a couple of years ago. It snowed here in North Texas for like a week straight, and that's
Yeah.
something that we've never seen before, and yet it happened. And I mean, you're talking about a foot and a half, 2 foot of snow outside everywhere, and how many people lost power. I mean, there are thousands, tens of thousands of people in
Oh
the
yeah.
Metroplex area lost power, and lost their heat, their access to food, their ability to drive down the roads. I mean, it was pretty bad, and it had never happened here before. I talked to my wife's grandfather, who's in his late 80s. He can't remember a time that's ever happened here, and he's lived here his whole life.
Mm.
So the point is that we need to we cannot allow ourselves to exist in this normalcy bias where tomorrow is going to be like today, like it was yesterday. We always have to be prepared for the potentiality that things could go sideways very quickly. And for at least for me, in the military, that's one thing that was kind of ingrained in you, this idea of Murphy's law. If something can go wrong, it will.
Yeah.
uh, and you kind of come to expect the worst in every given situation. So most veterans that I know, we're grumpy old vets, but we're usually pessimists because we've seen how
Yeah.
the world works, and we've seen how crappy things can get very quickly. So I think that if we look at the world today, I just want to list out a couple of scenarios that could quickly
Yeah. Go ahead.
upend our understanding of normal.
Mm-hmm.
So we have natural disasters, right? The Yellowstone caldera, if that super volcano erupts, obviously
Yeah.
everything's going to be gone here in the United States. But you could have massive earthquakes on the West Coast, triggering major tsunamis off the San Juan de Fuca shelf there up in the Pacific Northwest. We know that it's happened before in the 1700s. We could see the salt water in the tree lines 20 miles inland
Mm.
in Oregon, in Washington. I think it's in Washington. You can see
Yeah.
this. There's the trees are hundreds of years old. You can still see where
Mm.
the salt water affected those tree lines. The rings inside of the trees
Yeah.
and stuff. So, thankfully, nobody was really there in that area except for a few Indian tribes or Native Americans, whatever. And they still tell stories that they know what year it happened. So it
Mm.
could happen again, and we're probably overdue for one. You have natural disasters. Solar flares could completely fry all of our satellites and basically shut the internet down for a large portion of Western hemisphere. Think about how crazy that would be if all the internet went down. I mean,
Yeah.
how many businesses rely on the internet now? I mean, COVID, if anything else, what COVID did was it sped up the digitalization of our economy by 6 years. So if
Mm.
COVID hadn't happened, we wouldn't get to where we are already until like 2026 in terms of how connected everything is to the internet, right? Zoom
Right.
meetings and working from home and all the bandwidth, and all that stuff. We would have gotten there by 2026, but instead we got
Mm.
there in 2020 out of necessity, right? You have if China invades Taiwan, China is in some major problems, demographically, economically. For decades and decades under the Maoist policy, they had the two-child policy, and then that went down to a one-child policy. And so if you had a child, the first child was a girl, they would just get rid of the baby, abort him or whatever. And if it was a boy, they kept him. Well, what that's done over these past, 40, 50 years is you have this huge gender imbalance between male and female in China. So now you have a whole generation of men who have no prospects to get married. There's no future for them in that regard. And you also have this huge bell curve, if you will, upside down bell curve, where they're going to get down to a point where uh, uh, there's going to be more geriatric people than there are younger people to provide, and that's no later than 2050. I'd say like 60% of their population, 70% of their population is going to be geriatric, and they know this. Like these are
Yeah.
problems that these existential problems that they cannot recover from. Their economy is probably going to crash by 2030 because you think about, the West, right? United States, Britain, France, and other places. When we develop technologies, we create it from scratch. The prototype
Yeah.
during the first industrial age, and then it comes along, it gets improved in the second industrial age, and then the third industrial age. And so we have these generations where we are building infrastructure to develop a technology like the automobile, for instance, or the plane, or certain types of machines or industries. And it takes generations. And in doing that process of failing and succeeding, failure and success, failure, success, you learn what not to do, and you build safeguards and infrastructure around those things. Well, China has only had all of this technology in one generation. They hadn't had to go through all that. They've been agricultural for most of their history.
Right.
And it's only been in the last, really 20, 30 years that they've really um, exploded in an exponential kind of growth kind of way their
Yeah.
technological capabilities to meet the manufacturing demands. Once we allowed them to become the most favored nation status, I think under the Clinton years, they were able to reverse engineer a lot of our technology. They were able to steal in through corporate, what do they call it, where they steal things,
Piracy.
blueprints and
Yeah.
piracy, and and they're able to manufacture things very cheaply, but they don't have any of the safeguards or the infrastructure built around these things. So their economy is in a huge problem right now. You've seen there's been two major development companies that they've had, two of the biggest in the world, Evergrande, and I can't remember the other company, but they're bankrupt.
Yeah.
And they have like these whole cities that are built. They built these whole cities of like massive buildings, homes, and just malls and all sorts of things, but nobody lives there. They're building them to build them, but there's nobody that actually lives there.
They're
It's
actually
crazy,
tearing them
like these,
down too.
yeah, these ghost towns or whatever. So my point is that China's in a major problem, and you have Taiwan, who is the world's leading manufacturer of computer chips. So um, there is incentive there for China to
Yeah.
go in and take over Taiwan. And they may want
Right.
to do this if it looks like Trump's going to be the leading candidate. They may want to do this before he comes back into office because they
Yeah.
know Joe's corrupt and he's compromised and so on and so forth. So and
Well,
then
and we're going
not
to be
only that, but
spread. My apologies.
thin.
We're going to be so
No, it's
spread thin
thin.
in the Mid East anyway. And yeah, you're right. I mean, this whole thing is there's so many scenarios that are in place now to take everything down. It's really quite unbelievable. And my apologies.
Russia
Go ahead.
no, I'm gonna say Russia could accidentally hit NATO, some force in NATO, a stray missile could or a drone could crash into Poland or blow something up in Poland or another NATO member, and that right there would demand a response. And next thing you know, that's escalating to
Right.
World War III kind of levels. So, and then there could be an economic collapse. We know that we're 33 trillion in debt. There could be some huge, 2008 mortgage crisis kind of event that happens that nobody's even really tracking right now. So any one of those scenarios could quickly upend the United States into the degree that we are unrecognizable. if we end up, if China or Russia instigate some kind of greater conflict, and not even talking about, I'm not even talking about the Middle East right now with what's going on in with Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah and those groups. If China and Russia instigate something and it demands a response from us because we're the world superpower, and we're already overstretched, and we've given like so much of our equipment away to Ukraine and left $900 billion worth of equipment to the Taliban and in Afghanistan and all these other things. I mean, these are very, very existential problems that we're going to be facing as a nation. They could quickly reintroduce the draft, like you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. They could recall me, for instance, out of retirement. I could have to go back and serve. And these are kind of wars like you don't want to go in and fight. Like these are not, these are wars you're probably not going to come back from because of who we're fighting and the level of technology. That they're not cave dwellers with AK-47s and Stinger, with shoulder fired rockets. These are going to
Right.
be warships, planes, jets, cruise missiles, and all these other things. It's not going to be like it was in the war on terror.
Yeah.
And so that could quickly upend our sense of normalcy very, very fast. They could, if that happens, they could declare martial law because we're in a time of war, just like it was in World War II with FDR. They could institute like a one policy or one political party kind of system. I mean, there's any number of things that could happen. We know that they're willing to set aside the Constitution for the crisis, depending on what the crisis is. And so they did it
Yeah.
during COVID. I mean, why would they do it again for something like
Yeah.
a World War III? And I think most people in the United States would be very complicit with it. There's not going to be a lot of people pushing back on something like that, except for conservatives and the real constitutionalists, people that understand the danger and all that. So, and then the rapture could happen. I think I'm of the belief that the rapture is the world's next great crisis, and that when the Christ comes back in the sky, we meet him in the air. He takes however many Christians are on the earth at that time, and it could be, and I'm just spitballing here. It's
Yeah.
10%, right? If that's 10% of the American population, and American population is right around 320 or to 340 million Americans, you're looking at 32 to 34 million Americans that are gone instantly, or what is it, 30 to 40%, 30 to 40 million Americans that are instantaneously gone.
Yeah.
They're not showing up to work. They're not paying their bills. They're not shopping. They're not spending money. They're not, so on and so forth. I mean, it will absolutely collapse our economy overnight. And you remove all the children under a particular age. I'm of the belief that that age is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20. I know that's high for a lot of people, but the only ages that we are given, the Bible doesn't, go into a great deal of detail about this age of accountability, but
Yeah.
we know in a couple places in the Old Testament, in Exodus in particular, if you were under the age of 20, you did not pay a ransom tax for your sins when they were
Yeah.
crossing over from Egypt into the wilderness. And then we also know that those that entered in the promised land, and you can see it in Numbers, I can't remember the chapter of Numbers, but that generation, it was those that were like under 20, so 19 and younger, could enter into the promised land. It doesn't give us any specificity on what they believed or what they knew. It was just limited to an age.
Right.
And here we are decades or millennia later, and as we study the human brain, we realize that the last part of your brain that fully develops is the prefrontal cortex, and that's what governs all of your critical thinking skills. And that's developed. It's the last thing that develops because it takes time, experience, education. It takes you going through things and learning from those events to begin to develop a mindset.
Yeah.
And so that also corresponds to the what the policy God had back in Exodus days.
Yeah.
So my opinion, I'm not saying that I'm a right. I just tend to believe that because I think God is a just and fair God, and that anybody that says, well, God, you sent me to hell or the lake of fire, and I know we're going off on a huge rabbit trail here, but
That's okay.
if God is fair and just and 100% holy, 100% just, 100% fair, um, and he made a person whose brain wasn't fully developed to be able to make that decision to come to the Lord, that doesn't seem like justice in
Right.
any sense of, because we look today at our own system. The world earth, the earthly system we have here at justice. We have the best justice system in the world, and even we put an age limit at 18. If you're
Right.
under the age of 18, you're treated as a minor. If you're over the age of 18, you're treated as an adult,
Yeah.
regardless of what they did or didn't do. That has to be factored in there, that they were a minor committing that, because when we look back at our own lives, I know when I look back at my
Ooh.
16-year-old self, I was an idiot.
Yeah.
I was a moron, and I thought I knew everything. I
Yeah.
didn't know anything. So I think most 16-year-olds are like that, and
Yeah.
even keep going down. So, anyways, when you remove all the children and you remove all the mentally those that are unable to make decisions on their own, with Down syndromes and so forth. When you move all that from the world population, it is going to be a massive crisis, um, to the degree that it will probably collapse the world system altogether, and that will
Right.
trigger the necessity for the world to reorganize into this 10 kingdom or 10 region confederacy we see in Revelation. So,
Yeah. With what we're seeing now, um, where do you think, and last time we talked, none of this had happened already, if I remember right. With what we're seeing now, where do you think we go? I mean, because why did the United States, look, we know Biden is not for Israel. We know the Democrats are not for Israel. Why are we seeing this support for Israel? How does this factor in? You know, and by the way, I think Jesus even said that in the end times, people will be marrying and giving in marriage and all of that stuff, just like in the days of Noah and the days of Lot. So that's
yeah,
normalcy bias right there. So this
yeah,
is not just new, and this is not something. This is a part of human nature as well, our sin nature, I think, because we want to keep homeostasis in our life. We want to keep, that's the way we're wired. But where do we go from here? What should our outlook be? And I know, again, let's just get this out on the table. Um, we live like Jesus is not coming back for 10 years, but we watch because he could. In other words, you have to still occupy. You still have to go to work.
yeah.
You still have to do these things. We still have to live our life. But how do we live in a way where, especially in America, we are not caught off guard? We're not just living in a dream.
Well, I think where we go as a nation, I think, and this is just my opinion,
Yeah.
but given the severity of the events that have happened in Israel, this is not something that the West is going to be able to dissuade Israel from fulfilling and completing, right? They are going to go into Gaza in a ground invasion. They are going to decimate Hamas.
Yeah.
When that actually starts, we don't know, but it'll be, I think the U.S. has had their hand in all this, with Biden and his administration, with Anthony Blinken and all them, because they want to prevent Israel from going into Gaza. They've been wanting to manage this, and they feel like if they throw a lot of assets and support in there and allow Israel to just bomb the crap out of Gaza, that will suffice, and they'll be able to come up with some kind of negotiated peace settlement or something. But the things that have happened are so horrific.
Uh,
Um, these are things that the Israelis are not going to let lie.
yeah.
They chased after the Nazis for 40, 50 years after World War II, hunted them around the world, wherever they went.
Yeah.
This is not something that they're going to just let go. In this attack on October 7th wasn't even, they weren't even equating it to Yom Kippur War back in 73 or an Intifada or whatever. They're equating it back to the Holocaust. Like that's how
Yeah.
bad it was.
Oh, yeah.
So I think despite the West's effort and the pressure from the West that Israel will go into Gaza, They will have a ground invasion. They will completely decimate them. And that will trigger a couple of different things. That'll trigger a response from Hezbollah, which means that Israel is going to send their 100,000 soldiers plus jets, tanks, etc., missiles north to wipe out Hezbollah. And then it will probably also trigger some things in the West, what they call the West Bank, what we call Judea and Samaria.
Right.
That's going to trigger a response there as well. So I think that when this all is said and done, I think what we're going to see is the fulfillment of the Psalm 83 conflict, and in probably in conjunction with a Isaiah 17 scenario where Damascus
Damascus.
is completely just destroyed overnight and probably nuked. And as we've learned, and if anybody watches the news lately, there is two different Gazas. You have Gaza on the surface and you have Gaza underneath. They have a huge subterranean complex of tunnels and all sorts of things, which is why they need fuel so bad. They need fuel to run the generators to pump the air into those tunnels. And without fuel, they have to come out of the tunnels. They can't stay down there
Yeah.
because they're all choked to death. There's not enough air down there. But we also know that in Damascus, Syria, that as well, that Bashar Assad for decades had been building underneath that city and storing these chemical weapons and all sorts of nasty things. And when it comes to that time, I think Israel's not going to really have a choice but to nuke Damascus in order to burn up all of that junk that's down there. That's the only thing that's going to really eviscerate the chemicals and those things down to the molecular level. So I think they're going to have to nuke Damascus, and obviously
That's going
this
to
sets the stage.
trigger, my apologies.
Uh,
That's going to
yeah,
trigger a bigger response. If they
that will
use a
trigger.
nuke, which I agree with you, I think I think all of this ties in.
Yeah,
If they use a nuke, that's going to trigger Russia, China, and we see Turkey really turning on Israel now.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
Erdogan is using really strong language. Russia is starting to use strong language. Of course, Iran always does. And China, I haven't heard a whole lot of out of them other than they support China or Russia and Turkey and Iran. But that's going to trigger a huge response. And America is not in that.
no, no. So what I think happens when Israel does this ground invasion, and we have all these second and third order events with Hezbollah in the north, Fatah and all these different groups in what they call the West Bank. And Israel may pay a heavy price, but I think they're going to prevail in the end, and they are going to
Right.
end up destroying Damascus because of the threats that are underneath the city itself. That does set the stage for Gog Magog in Ezekiel 38. So the
Yeah.
Turkey, Russia, Iran will begin to mass against Israel itself. But I think also that Israel or the Israel U.S. there may be a joint attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities as well, and on top of all this.
Right.
Now, if the U.S. supports Israel in these regards, in the ground invasion, and then probably in the response to Hezbollah and Fatah with the West Bank area, um, I think that we may continue on as a nation pretty much under normal situations. If we come out against Israel in these regards and try and force some kind of a peace agreement or force Israel to
Ugh,
stop fighting, I think the United
bad.
States is going to come under severe repercussions and judgment,
Yeah.
just like we always have. Every time we've done this to Israel, we've come under these severe judgments, like Hurricane Katrina, mortgage crisis. I mean, anything bad you think about the United States happening, it's been in response for us doing something
Yep.
against Israel. So Genesis 12, 1 through 3, and particularly verse 3, God says that I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. That's never been rescinded. That's still in
Right.
effect. And so when we turn our back on Israel, we betray Israel. It's not going to bode very well for us. So there could be situations like that. Now, those four things that I mentioned earlier, the natural disasters, China invading Taiwan, Russia hitting NATO, or some kind of economic collapse, I would call those black swan events in a
Right.
certain degree, right? There are potentialities that could happen. Will they happen in this year? I don't know. But I think if we turn against Israel, any one of those four or more could happen simultaneous. And if
Yeah.
that does, the United States is going to fold in on itself very quickly. The U.S. military right now is way under strength, and nobody wants to join. Now, think about it this way: our population in World War II, in terms of our nation, was we were 2 billion people on the planet in the year 1900. So the U.S. population in 1940 or 1939, somewhere, whenever Pearl 41 was when Pearl Harbor happened. Let's just say that we were theoretically we're around 200 million people. We had I can't even remember how big our army was back at the time, like 2 or 3 million people in the armed forces, back then. Um, and it was a huge percentage. And so you not joining the military at that time was seen as very much a negative. Like, the war ends, you're going out looking for a job, and where were you? What'd you do during the war? And if you said, well, I didn't go, I was just working over here, like you were pretty much a dirtbag,
Oh
and
yeah.
you were going to get very far. But nowadays, it's almost a detriment to go in the military because of the wokeness and all the other perceptions that are going on with that, plus all the lunacy that goes on in the military now. Where they're debating more on pronouns and things like that,
Ugh.
and then letting transgender generals run. It's absolute lunacy. That's more important than being able to fight a two-front war, which we can't do anymore. We used to. That's what our posture was since World War II: be able to fight on two different fronts at the same time, and that is not sustainable anymore by any stretch. I mean, we don't have the military anymore to do that. We don't have the manpower. And so even though our population went from 200 million, and I'm just saying it was 200 million, maybe it was less than that, to where we are today at 340 million, our army has shrank even considerably more than it used to be. And we've tried to compensate with technology, smart bombs and drone technology and all these other things. But there's just not going to be any way to replicate boots on the ground kind of control over a city, neighborhood, whatever. So I think if we betray Israel over the next few months as they begin their ground invasion, I think it's going to not bode very well for us. I think if we continue to support them, I think that you will see the U.S. continue to be able to support her until that time comes, right? We know by the
Yeah.
time Gog Magog happens that the U.S. is not in the equation at all.
Yeah.
So something is going to happen one way or the other between now and then. So I think that thing that's going to happen is the rapture of the church. So Ezekiel 38, God's focus seems to be almost entirely back on the nation of Israel. So we don't seem to be, the church does not seem to be in the equation at this point either. So, and also during that time, that Gog Magog conflict, you start to see the supernatural coming back into play. And I've always believed that before the rapture, when supernatural things happen, it's very rare and it's very they stand out, because they don't happen very often.
Right.
But after the rapture, the world's going to very quickly be thrust back into the time of the supernatural. And so we see a supernatural kind of salvation of national Israel by God himself, who comes down and wipes out these armies.
Mm.
And so I don't know, it could happen very rapidly. And I've used this quote with you before, but in discussing World War I, it seemed impossible. I mean, it seemed ludicrous
Yeah.
that Germany would go to war with England and France and Russia over Austria's issues with Serbia, and it's how crazy that all turned out. And it went from impossible to inevitable without ever going through improbable. And so I
Yeah.
think that's kind of the way things can happen these days. That, and what I mentioned earlier with that quote from World War Z, people don't think something's going to happen because it's never happened before until it
Yeah.
happens, And so I just think that we need to always be of the mind to be prepared spiritually, meaning you have to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So that's the most important thing. Secondly, if you're a believer already, trusting in God and knowing that nothing is going to happen to you, just like you mentioned with the story in Job, nothing can happen to you unless God allows that.
Yeah.
And if God has already allowed it, it doesn't matter. You can't stop it at that point. So it's no use, stressing over that thing,
Yep.
whatever that thing is. And so I used this personally when I was doing a lot of my flight training in when I went from helicopters to planes. And I'm flying a lot of other people that aren't very good pilots. And and we're in these terribly scary situations. And if I had not had that mindset, and I would have freaked out and I would have just been a mess. But I just said, look, I'm not going to die today unless God allows it. And if God allows it, it doesn't matter if I'm here or on the ground driving in a car.
Yeah.
That's my time, you know. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to just keep going. So we as believers need to take comfort in that reality that God has got his hand on our lives. He knows every hair on our head. If he cares about the sparrow, he cares. How much more does he care about you? If he knows
Yeah.
every star by name and he knows every hair on your head, he knows your life better than you know it, and he knows what's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen to you before you know it. So we just need to trust him in that, and not live in fear, because we're not called to live in fear. We're called to live in boldness and in sharing the gospel and not caring what other people think, whether we offend them or not offend them, or um, it's better to tell them, hey, if you don't change your direction right now, you're going to spend eternity separated from God. And what that means, you're going to be separated from everything that's good, pleasant, nice, enjoyable. And I'm
Uh,
talking about hell doesn't have, there's no light,
yeah.
there's no cool weather, it's not pleasant to be in, it doesn't smell good, there's no oxygen, I mean, like, you think about, it's just smoke, darkness, and pain,
Mm.
in fire. And fire doesn't give off light. It's just this burning fire that exists in darkness. And so that's the way it's going to be forever. So
Ooh.
if you don't change your direction now and come to the Lord Jesus Christ and get to know him on a personal level as your Lord and Savior, that's going to happen. And none of us know when our next breath's not guaranteed, our next heartbeat. We don't know if we walk out of our house today to go to the gym, we can get a car accident and an 18
That's
wheeler
right.
could smash us flat as pancakes. And that's it. Your life's
Yeah.
over. Now you face eternity, the long eternity. So
Pete, it strikes me that, and just kind of wrapping it up here, it kind of strikes me that God allowing that bubble to be popped is not necessarily a bad thing.
no.
Now, it's not going to feel good, and God never offered us a life of ease. I don't care what Joel Osteen or any of the name it and claim it people tell you, God did not promise you a life of roses. Okay. He just did not. He didn't say you were going to be successful. He didn't say you were going to be prosperous with money. He did not say that you were going to have great health. None of those things. But he did promise he would be with you until the end of the age. And and like I said, I've, on that thumbnail I sent you, it's got the evil clown about to pop it. I think God uses the plans of the devil in his children's life to further his cause. Look at Peter. Jesus said, Peter, by the way, Satan has come and asked permission to sift you like wheat. And the idea there was Satan's going to sift Peter and sift out all of the good and only leave the bad. And Jesus said, but I've prayed for you that your faith would remain. In other words, in that sifting process, God uses the sifting of the devil, his plan to do evil, and God said, I'm going to turn it around and use it for good. Instead of sifting out all of the good and leaving the bad, I'm going to sift out the bad and leave the good. Sifting sucks. I assure
Yeah.
you, Peter did not like it, and neither will we. But in the end, getting out of that bubble, getting out of this normalcy bias is really stepping into the reality of the deep end of faith, isn't it? I mean, that because now you've got to live by faith, not in all of these mechanisms that you have put in place to keep yourself in a dream world where only good things are happening. I mean, is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, how many people have put their faith in their 401ks, in their retirements,
Yeah.
um, in their personal wealth, in their families, in their things that they have, and how quickly those things can be taken from us, and
Yeah.
how quickly that wealth can be stripped from us through whatever, whether it's the IRS or a nation collapses or the economy collapses or whatever
Yeah.
happens, your things can be taken from you, just like it was taken from Job. And that process is incredibly painful.
Right.
But in the end, what is left is that God wants to separate you from these things that are becoming idols in your life. You're placing your faith in these things rather than trusting in God to
Yeah.
provide for you. And I
Let
think
let,
that
let
the
me
the
finish it
church,
this way. And if this is okay.
yeah,
God said, don't amass treasures on earth. Amass them in heaven, where neither moth or rust does corrupt and thieves do not break through and steal. You know, the things we're talking about might seem kind of scary, but I agree, Pete. It tears our hands off of this world, and it puts our priorities where they're supposed to be and our faith where it's supposed to be. And in the end, that bubble popping, while it may hurt, I think honestly, it's where God is trying to get his children.
yeah, I went through this years ago in my coming to Jesus moment.
Yeah.
It was a very painful process in my life, and I'd reached a pretty much rock bottom spiritually. And I can just say that out of it, God has been able to do good things through me. And I'm not that smart. I'm not that good of a person. I'm not anything that I would promote myself as. I'm just a tool. I'm a tool that God has been able to use, and I've just
Right.
tried to make myself usable in those regards. And I think that's how God wants us to be. And I think the churches today have lost vision of that, um, and they've really become businesses in a large degree, because now they're worrying about their staff, the electrical bills, utilities, and payroll, and
Yeah.
if I preach this message, how is it going to be perceived? Will that make a drop in donations or tithes or whatever? And that's not what Christ has called us to do.
Yeah.
And church or no church, each one of us is called to share the gospel.
Right.
And that's the number one thing in our role here, is to share the gospel, because what you're doing there is you are investing in eternity. In you and I, when we die, if we die or we get raptured, we can't take anything with us.
Nope.
You know, all we can take is other people.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
when we share the gospel and somebody comes to the Lord, we share in that. And that's where that passage about investing in heaven,
Yeah.
and not worrying about the material wealth here that's going to be stolen or corrupted or corroded. And ultimately that's our main purpose. That's why we have the Bible that we have, to be able to tell other people about this God that is introduced to us through this Bible, and he gives us the plan of salvation. And our souls, like I mentioned earlier, are from Ecclesiastes. We're built for eternity. You're going to
Yeah.
spend eternity somewhere.
Right.
um, are you going to spend it apart from God or with God? And if God is good, and God is love, and God is light, and God is mercy and kindness and peace and joy, and all of those things that we love and crave, that's where we'll spend eternity if we have a personal relationship through Jesus Christ. If we don't spend eternity with God, we're going to be in a place that is void of all those things, and it's going to be absolute misery and hell. And so we're trying to warn people today that, look, the world may not end tomorrow. The world may not end in 6 months from now. We don't know what's going to happen. We're looking at the world today and making educated guesses based off scripture and based off what's happening. But ultimately, each one of us has the potential to not live the next day and not be alive the next day. I could have a heart attack tomorrow,
Yep.
tonight. Anybody out there could have a heart attack, or get hit by a random asteroid that falls out of the sky and just so happens to hit
Yeah.
us in the head and kill us. You just don't know. We don't know what
Yep.
tomorrow holds. And so I think when we live for eternity, and we invest in in heaven, that regardless of how our end comes or when it comes, we'll be longing and looking for those, what is it, those four words, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Is that five
That's right.
words?
I think it's five.
Um,
Well
five
done,
or six
thou
words.
good and faithful.
Yeah.
What is that?
So
7? Hey, we're close.
seven.
Hey, we never
Yeah.
said we could count.
I gotta still use fingers and toes.
Yeah.
So,
So,
but I mentioned in my Monday broadcast, I said, I think somebody had asked me what we can do in the last days. We share the gospel, we love each other, because Christ said that that's how people would know we were His followers, is if
right.
we loved one another. And then we pray. We pray for those that are in need, and for those, all those things going on, whether it's people in your immediate circle, or you pray for them in a larger sense, like peace in Jerusalem and those kind of things. And then the last thing is you basically you're watching and waiting. You're watching and waiting for the Lord to return, expectantly, just as a child would wait for her father or mother to come home from a long trip. And when they see you, they just can't wait, because they've been waiting and waiting and waiting and counting down the days.
Yeah,
And there in that is a crown of righteousness.
that's right.
And there and when you have that expectancy, you want to be found doing good work and doing good things, because those good works don't save you, but you want to be found after you're saved. You want to be found doing those things, because you don't know when the master is going to return.
Yeah,
And so we work, we whatever God has called you to do. And for me, it's to teach and to write and to speak and to be accessible in all these ways, because He's blessed and gifted me in those areas.
yeah,
And for other people, it may be to a particular ministry, it may be to a particular need in their community or their family. Whatever it is that God's called us to do, I think we need to be found faithful doing that.
amen.
And when we look around ourselves, and people always ask me, like, well, I don't know what God called me to do.
Right.
Well, I'm like, well, look at yourself, look at your surroundings, look at the situation that you're in, and ask yourself, how can God use me in where I'm at right now? What's the best way that He can use me? And it may be in their church, it may be in where they work, or whatever. And
Yeah,
so I think it's a fairly easy question if we turn the camera around and look at ourselves and say, okay, I'm here in this place right now. How can God use me in this moment?
that's
And
right.
if you pray to God to open that door, He will open that door for you,
That's right.
and He will show you exactly what it is, and you'll know fairly quickly. I never wanted to write. Writing was the last thing on the planet I wanted to do. Like, that was not anything.
Yeah,
I I hated writing. This just sounds incredibly boring, sitting down writing articles. Like, no. Um, but here I am, almost 13 years later, hundreds of articles and books and all this other stuff, and God's been able to use that for something that I didn't think I was even capable of doing. He was able to use me to do those things. So
it's
all
amazing.
credit goes to Him. I'm not, I was never a good student, and I was
Yeah.
not that bright of a person. I partied way too hard, killed too many brain cells. And, um, but despite all those, physical flaws, God was still able to use me.
That's
So,
right. So the message today is allow God to strip all that stuff away. Get busy for the Lord where you're at. And if you don't know Jesus, don't wait, because tomorrow could be too late. Guys, thanks again for coming in. Pete, man, thank you so much. What an awesome day, man. I knew, I was like, Pete's got something to say on this. And man, just did not disappoint. God, I think, is going to use this, speak to people, and hopefully wake some people up. So thanks again for coming, and I will see you next time. See, I'm already
next
I'm
week.
already assuming that people come back.
I always come back, man. Always.
Oh yeah, no, I love it. Our people, everybody loves it. So it's great because we get a lot of great comments, and then we got a lot of really bad comments too. So and that's okay too. So hey, man, the devil doesn't like it. I do, and that's all that matters. So blessings,
All right.
man. Have a great day, and thank you so much.
Amen. Talk to you later.
Awesome. Thanks.
The impact. Living in our memory.
Let's see.
I can
There we
hear
go.
you now. I can see you. How's the gym?
It was good, man. I did shoulders today, and had a
Yeah.
good got a good burn on them.
Ah,
And then shoulders, and then I did squats,
no.
which I normally hate, but I just need to do them anyways,
Yeah.
just because.
I I was a leg guy. I loved leg days. And there's
Mm.
nothing there is nothing like riding the edge of throwing up on a leg day. I was I'm so masochistic or something. I don't know. I mean, but there's a video up on my YouTube where I don't know if I told you this, if I did, stop me, but I had a 25-pound plate fall from 6 feet up and guillotine my foot, my left foot,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
just as we were getting ready to do squats. And I went back the next day and leg pressed with 3 jammed up hurt toes. Hey, hold on 1 second. Let me get this. Brandon.
Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Hey, what's your ETA?
So I'm at the charging station now. So I'm going to top it off, and then I was going to head your way. So
Probably an hour and a half.
yeah, I would say an hour and a half. Although it says it's 45 minutes to charging, it's on 60%. Does that sound right?
No, that's not right. It yeah. Unless it just went cold. So if you just went in cold, it usually takes a little longer. Hold on 1 second. I'm trying to let me make sure for it. I'm gonna Sandra works right like literally a mile or two from the house. I'm gonna send you that address and just take it because my car is there. And if you don't mind, she's right there. It's Copart, and when you pull up, yeah, she sure does.
Cool.
Yeah.
We use them sometimes to get certain things we can't get. So that's good to know.
Yeah. Oh goodness. Yeah, man. So yeah, she works there. But when you pull in, she's right in that. There's only one building, so she's right in that building, right inside the door. But she has my other car is up at our office, and the car, the Tesla Model Y that you're going to work on, put the wrap on the front and that, she has it. And I'm just making sure she has my card with it. If not, then I have my card here. So,
Gotcha.
but I mean, but the problem is I don't have another car here, so I have no way to get to her. So, and I apologize. I complete.
Grab the card and.
Okay, yeah, you have my address. I'm looking to see. I'm getting ready to shoot a podcast. So normally Pete and I go about an hour and a half. but so I'll just kind of wait for your text when you get here. I'm waiting for her to let me know if she has my card. And if she does, I'll just send you there, and that's great. And
yeah, just let me know one way or another.
Okay.
Like I said, at least 30 minutes to charge. So
okay.
That was an hour to drive. So
all right,
looking an hour and 30 or 45 till I get there. So.
Okay, sounds good, man. And like I said, if you're just gonna put the delivery fee on the invoice, that's fine. Oh, she's texting me now. Okay, she's got the card there. When I come pick the car up, can I bring the letters and you guys just put them on there when I get there? Okay, sounds good, man. Because that way you don't have to come here and then go there, all that stuff.
Yeah, so. I was going to say one of the letters, so I washed it this morning for.
Did it come off?
Yeah, the top of the A came off.
Oh.
So retaped it and put it back on.
Oh, really? In the back of it?
The A.
Huh.
So I retaped it, put it back on. I mean, we just hit it with a wash mitt, and it just kind of came off in our hand. So.
Oh wow.
But I retaped it for you.
Okay, you think it'll? What you think it'll stay or?
It should be okay.
Okay.
I put some black adhesive on there. It's a little bit stronger than the gray that I had. So.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully, I'll stay.
If not, I'll super glue it.
I gotcha.
All right. I appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, Brandon. All right, bye. Sorry, Pete. My wife's her car, both of our, let's see, 10.
I had to take my hat off, man. It was hot.
Oh yeah. And I'm sorry, man. Let me,
No. Let me see how it is with the light off. Wait.
11, 12. Hey man, sorry about that. Hey, listen, she's actually, she gets off at noon, for lunch. So she comes home since she's so close. If you're there, if you're getting close to noon, between noon and 1 o'clock, just come to the house. Okay, man, I appreciate it. Thanks, Brandon. All right, bye. These, my wife's wrap on her car, had a little problem. So there's only one guy in the state that uses that kind of wrap and is qualified to use it. So he's 2 hours away. So getting these things done. And so getting a front spoiler put on my car or my Model Y. And of course, I'm going to make sure this is cut out, because every Christian that hangs out with our crowd, they think that if you have a Tesla, you're a climate freak and all that. And I'm like, I'm not a climate freak. I just like the car.
You'd say you wouldn't trust that in a snowstorm, though.
No, I wouldn't trust it in a snowstorm, nor would I trust it in a flood. No, actually, I think in a snowstorm, that thing would only last a few minutes. But that's also why I have a gas car too. So
yeah,
actually, we have two gas cars as well. So, but I like the cars. They're super cool. They're fast. They're fun. So, and to keep them charged cost me both of them about $40 a month. So,
oh wow.
Oh yeah, it didn't cost anything. So
that's, you get the batteries are what, $60,000 or something.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't drive it a lot. She drives hers a little more than I do, because she goes back and forth to work. But she works close. But I mean, there's we know a guy that's got a Tesla that's got 148,000 miles on it, and it's only degraded like 5%. So, I mean, I figure Jesus is coming back before my car dies. At least I hope. So, but actually, it's a little bit of a misnomer, because people are like, oh, the battery is actually 24,000 if you do that. But if you just get it refurbished, where they take the cells and they put new cells in on the bad ones, then it's like $4,000, something like that. So,
All right, I am ready. Yep. Doing normalcy bias.
Yeah. So, So my idea is on this is, people are living in a bubble, dude. I mean, and just quite honestly, talking to family, talking to friends, talking to people, talking to the people in church, people are living in a bubble. And I think that demonic clown Satan is about to pop everybody's bubble. I think that, Jan Markell and everybody, you hear Tom, everybody repeat that same line, what did you think the last days were going to look like? But people still don't seem to grasp the gravity of what's going on, or how close we are to things just really going sideways.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel like I'm off on that?
No. I mean, the town I live in is, pretty much insulated from, I don't want to say insulated from the rest of the world, but it felt like that for a long time until COVID. Yeah. Once COVID kind of reached into our town and things started to shut down, and where people were, going through toilet paper shortages and
going crazy,
having to work from home and all. Yeah, no,
I stood in a Sam's where people were fighting over toilet paper. And a lady looked at me and she's like, can you? I was like, I got you. So I just walk in there. I mean, because I'm a bigger guy. So I just walk in there and I'm like, give me one of them boxes. Guy gave you a box. I handed it to the lady. I said, give me another one. He gave me another one. I put it in and I walked off. And all these people are like,
Yeah.
I was like,
No,
there are some benefits to being a big bodybuilder.
that's true. That is very true.
Yeah.
But no, I felt like this town was pretty much isolated from a lot of things in the world, or insulated.
Yeah.
Because there's not a lot of military here.
Yeah.
There were vets and stuff, but when I met my wife here, years ago, 2007 timeframe, when I told her what I did, not her, but they like, I'm pretty sure they didn't believe me when I was like, yeah, I'm a helicopter pilot. I'm in the 101st, blah, blah, blah. And I'm pretty sure they're like, yeah, right. And so, the next time I came and
Sure you
visited,
are,
I
Pete.
brought pictures and my evaluations and this
You had to prove
orders and
it.
things like that. Not to they didn't ask me to prove it. I just
Right.
felt like I should
You felt
show
like
them,
you
just
better.
because of I'm that kind of guy.
Yeah,
So
I am too. I'd be like, no, look, I look. So, matter of fact, the funny thing is, when I met Sandra, it was my first day back in the gym after 2 years of being out from a car accident. And I mean, it just wiped me out for 2 years. And I went from over 300 pounds down to 197, 98 pounds when I met her. And we met, and I'm like, well, normally I'm a really big bodybuilder, real big. And she's like, yeah, okay. And then as I kept recuperating and gaining size back, she was like, you better be glad I didn't meet you when you were 300 pounds, because I would have just thought you were a big douchebag. I was like, hey, I'm a nice guy. She goes, but people just look at guys like you and think you're a douchebag. I'm like, golly, man.
Yeah.
Thanks, dear.
Yeah. Thanks for
No.
the vote of
Okay.
confidence.
I'm gonna kick us off, and we'll get rocking and rolling.